Chapter 8. The Heretic's Gambit. The fires started in the dawn hour, when the mist still clung to the lower terraces and the jungle's chorus had not yet risen to full roar. At first they were small, thin tongues of orange licking beneath the eaves of a minor archive temple, the glow faint behind shuttered stone slits. The few skink attendants who noticed assumed a lantern had tipped or incense braziers had flared. They chittered uneasily, sending one of their number to investigate. By the time that skink reached the archive's inner stair, the flames had already taken root. The corridor beyond pulsed with flickering light. Smoke slithered along the ceiling like a living thing, carrying the smell of burning parchment and charred resin. Glyph scrolls, some older than any living creature in Chaqua, curled inward as fire devoured them. The ink, blistering and bleeding, the attendant froze. In the heart of the archive, 3 red-crested skinks stood amid toppled racks and overturned ink bowls, their crests smeared with blood paint, their eyes fever-bright. They fed armfuls of scrolls to the growing blaze, chanting as they worked, "Sotek rise, old ways fall, blood tide sweep all." The attendant could not speak, could not move. One of the cultists finally noticed him. "Go," the zealot said softly, almost kindly. "Tell Chaqua. Tell him the first chains have been broken." Then he flung another handful of scrolls into the fire. The attendant fled. Behind him, the ceiling beams began to crack. By the time Chaqua stood at the edge of the plaza below the archive temple, the building had become a blazing wound on the flank of the ziggurat. Embers spiraled into the sky. Ash drifted down like grey snow. Skinks ran in panicked circles, trying to form chain lines to douse the flames with water from the nearby fountains. The heat drove them back every time. "Keep them away from the entrance," Chaqua ordered, voice tight. "If the interior collapses while they are inside, we lose more than parchment." He meant the cultists, though the thought made bile rise in his throat. He would not let them burn to death inside the storehouse of the Old One's words. Even traitors were part of the great plan once. He craned his neck, watching, but saw no shapes in the surging light. A tremor rippled underfoot. Stone tiles jumped. Cracks zigzagged across the plaza. The Skaven dug, restless. Tlacora's grip tightened around his staff until the carved jade creaked. Chaos above, vermin below. The city was being eaten from every direction. Ziltlak chose that moment to appear. He emerged from a side stairway, framed by smoke and swirling ash, flanked by a procession of heavily armed red crests. Unlike the wild, disparate gatherings of previous days, these skinks moved in formation, their obsidian blades and bronze-tipped spears held at disciplined angles. They were not a mob tonight. They were an army. Ziltlak himself wore a ritual harness of scaled leather and bone, layered over his crimson hide. His chest was painted with a coiling serpent's sigil, its head circling his throat. Dried blood darkened the engraving. In his right hand he carried the bronze sickle. In his left, an ornate staff topped with a stylized serpent jaw. He stepped into the plaza as if it belonged to him. "Children of Chaqua," he called, voice carrying over the crackle of the burning temple. "Behold the first stone falling from an old, rotting wall." Skinks turned to stare. Traditionalists, attendants, even a few city guard. Some hissed in outrage. Others shrank back. Chaqua moved to meet him, stalking across the plaza with measured steps. "Ziltlak," he said, each syllable edged. "You have burned a repository of the Old One's wisdom. This is unforgivable even by your standards of blasphemy." Ziltlak tilted his head. The firelight danced across his eyes, making them look as though something were burning inside his skull. "Wisdom?" he echoed. Those brittle glyphs bound us like shackles. They spoke of patience while the world rotted, of cycles and distance while Sotek's signs scream inches from our snouts. He gestured to the blaze. Today, we unshackle ourselves. You have destroyed irreplaceable knowledge, Chaqua replied, voice low and dangerous. You cripple Chaqua while vermin gnaw at our foundations. You would tear down our weapons in the very moment we need them. Ziltlak smiled without warmth. That is where you are wrong, old one. This is the weapon. He raised his arms, turning slowly so all in the plaza could see him. Hear me, people of Chaqua, he cried. Hear Sotek's will. The tremors, the blood rain, the serpent lightning, these are not warnings of doom. They are commands. Rise, claim, purge. Sotek demands not cowards clinging to the sleep mutterings of a slan who will not wake, but warriors who will give him a city bathed in blood. Dumb, a buzz of anxious voices rippled through the gathered skinks. Chaqua felt something shift in the air, a collective breath exhaled, an expectation uncoiled. Ziltlak lifted his staff high. I, Ziltlak, prophet of the blood tide, proclaim this. Sotek demands Chaqua, all of it, every terrace, every pool, every ziggurat. We must wrest it from the frail grasp of those who will not unleash his wrath. His voice hardened. The slan have failed. Chaqua has failed. The old glyphs have failed. Only blood will answer now. Chaqua's frill rose to its full, imposing height. You dare claim the slan's failure in front of their chosen? I do more than dare, Ziltlak hissed. I act. He slammed his staff into the stone. Behind him, more red crests emerged from adjacent stairways and alley mouths, dozens upon dozens, their weapons at the ready. They moved to surround the plaza, forming a tightening ring of crimson-scaled zeal. Some wore trophies of battle, skaven tails, shredded banners, carved rat skulls. Sotek amulets clinked as they shifted. This had been planned, not a riot. As I saw, Chaqua saw it now, the positioning, the timing, the destruction of the archive as both symbol and distraction. The cult had chosen their moment, when Karok's regiments were locked in battle in the wetlands, and the city was gasping from tremors and assassination. Ziltlak's voice softened, honeyed, poisonous. Stand down, Chaqua. Yield the administrative temples to us. Let the serpent's faithful take command of Chaqua's war effort. We will purge the skaven. We will purge the faithless. We will give Sotek a city worthy of his gaze. And if I refuse? Chaqua asked. Ziltlak's smile widened. Then we begin our cleansing with you. The first blow came not from either leader, but from the crowd. A young traditionalist attendant, crest dyed pale blue, stepped forward and hurled his glyph rod at Ziltlak with a cry of rage. It bounced off a red crest's shield harmlessly, but the action broke whatever fragile balance remained. Two Sotek zealots rushed the young skink and cut him down in an instant, obsidian blades punching through his chest. He collapsed in a spray of blood that painted the nearest serpent carving. The plaza inhaled as one, then all breath turned into screaming. Traditionalist skinks surged toward the fallen body, some to defend, others to avenge. Red crests met them with weapons raised, chanting Sotek's name. Claws raked scales, blades bit flesh. A fountain of blood spattered across the steps of the nearest ziggurat. The sacred stone drank it greedily. Stand down, Chaqua roared, but his words were swallowed by chaos. Skink crashed into skink in a frenzy of tails and teeth and steel. Old temple servants fought with ceremonial knives and broken staves. Cultists fought with honed obsidian and ruthless intent. The plaza, once echoing with prayer and the measured tread of patrols, reverberated now with shrieks and the dull chop of blades into meat. One red crest leapt onto the shoulders of a traditionalist guard, biting into his frill. The guard screamed, spinning wildly before slamming both of them against a stone pillar hard enough to crack it. They slid down together, twitching. Another cultist knelt over a wounded opponent and drove his dagger into the skink's neck, then his chest, then his eyes. He muttered Sotek's name with each thrust, face rapturous. Blood pooled in the grooves between plaza tiles, tracing long, forgotten channels carved for old rituals. Chaqua threw himself into the fray, not as a warrior, but as a wedge. His staff crackled with geomantic force as he slammed it repeatedly into the ground, sending shockwaves that knocked combatants sideways. Several skinks went sprawling. Others scrambled back in alarm. "Stop this madness," he thundered. "The enemy is below us, not in front of you." A cultist sprang at him, blade raised. Chaqua swung his staff, catching the fanatic in the ribs. Bone cracked audibly. The skink flew backward, coughing blood. "Traitor," the dying zealot rasped. "Coward, slave to silence." Chaqua did not respond. His eyes were already on Zieltlak. The prophet watched the spreading slaughter with an expression perilously close to satisfaction. It was not joy too cold for that. It was the satisfaction of a craftsman seeing his design function exactly as intended. Each corpse was proof. Each scream, each severed limb, each smear of blood on sacred steps, all were fuel poured onto a fire he had chosen to light. "The weak show themselves," Zieltlak murmured, almost to himself. "Those unwilling to bleed, unwilling to kill, unwilling to embrace the serpent's hunger. If you seek the weak," Chaqua snarled, striding toward him through the chaos, "look to those who burn their own city rather than defend it." And Zieltlak stepped down from the low altar stone, staff poised. "We defend it," he hissed, "not as you would with prayer and waiting and dead stone, but with blood, with action, with purification." Behind him, several cultists broke away from the melee and sprinted toward the nearest stairway leading up the ziggurat. They carried sacks of oil jars and bundles of dry brush. "Chaqua, you would burn more?" he demanded. "The plaques, the geomantic registers, the command tablets of the slan?" Zieltlak's eyes glittered. "They are chains," he said simply. "We break chains." Chaqua lunged. Zieltlak moved faster than his lean frame suggested, whipping his staff up to parry. Jade and serpent bone collided in a spray of sparks. They circled each other, tails lashing, the brawl of hundreds raging around them like a storm around two jagged stones. "You doom, Chaqua," Chaqua accused. "Without the plaques, we cannot direct the geomantic web. We cannot call the Bastiladon engines. We do not need the old one's web." Zieltlak cut in, eyes blazing. "We have Sotek. He answers blood, not tablet scratchings." "You mistake something hungry for something holy," Chaqua growled. "You feed a maw that will devour you last. Better last than first." Zieltlak spat. He feinted left, then thrust his staff toward Chaqua's throat. The slan's proxy-cast skink twisted aside with surprising agility, slamming his jade-tipped staff into Zieltlak's wrist. Bone cracked. The serpent staff slipped from the prophet's grasp and clattered across the tiles. Zieltlak hissed in pain, but he smiled, even as he clutched his arm. "You fight well," he said. "For a relic, and you talk much," Chaqua replied. For a corpse. He raised his staff to finish it. A scream cut through the air, sharper than the others. One of the cultists had reached the upper plaque gallery. He smashed an oil jar against the carved inscriptions, dousing them in flammable slick. Another struck flint. Flames sprang to life, small but eager. The dry offerings stacked nearby ignited in an instant, sending coils of black smoke up the stairway. "No!" Chaqua roared, stumbling back from Zildtlak in his desperation to see. Smoke billowed, black and oily. The plaque's records of alignment, ritual, correction were catching fire like dry leaves. Centuries of knowledge flared and began to crumble. Zildtlak let out a soft, savage laugh. "There," he whispered. "The first wall falls. Soon the others. And then only Sotek's law remains." "Your law," Chaqua said, turning back to him. "Your hunger, dressed in a god's scales." Zildtlak's eyes went narrow. "You dare say I speak for myself?" he snarled. "You felt the apparition. You saw the serpent writhe above us. You heard its hiss in your skull. This is not my hunger. It is his. And if he is madness," Chaqua said quietly, "if what you serve is frenzy without balance, a god unmoored from the great plan," Zildtlak bared his fangs. "Then let the universe burn." For a heartbeat, the sounds of battle seemed to dim even though the killing continued. That sentence hung between them like a drawn blade. Then the plaza shuddered, not from skinks, not from falling plaques, from below. Stone cracked underfoot as the deepest tremor yet rumbled through Chaqua. Tiles split, opening jagged wounds that oozed dust and the faint hiss of subterranean air. The ratmen were closer, closer than either faction wanted to admit. Chaqua staggered, catching himself on his staff. Several combatants on both sides fell screaming into fresh fissures, their voices cut off abruptly. "Look," Chaqua snarled, pointing down at the splitting stone. "Look what you waste your blood on. We tear each other apart while the Skaven rise beneath us." Zildtlak's crest quivered. For a moment, just a moment, something like doubt flickered in his gaze. Then it was gone. "If they come," he said, "they will only prove Sotek's trial is real. And those who stand with me will be ready. Those who stand with you will already be dead." Another section of the ziggurat cracked above them. Stone blocks tumbled down the steps, smashing into combatants, sending bodies flying with crunching impacts. Blood sprayed in high arcs, painting the serpentine carvings that lined the stairs. Skink fought skink still, even as the city shuddered, even as the enemy clawed upward. The sacred ziggurat steps glistened dark and slick, streams of skink blood winding down into the fissures, like offerings poured straight into the hungry throat of the Under-Empire. In the distance, somewhere beyond the jungle veil and the stone platforms, the muted roar of Karok's battle against the Skaven echoed like distant thunder. Chaqua was being bled from 2 directions, and on its sacred heights, the heretic's gambit played out in fire and red ruin, with no sign of ending. Chapter 9. Rats in the Holy Vaults. The sacred vaults beneath Chaqua had always been places of deep silence. Not peaceful silence, never that, but a heavy, reverent stillness that settled in the stone like ancient memory. The walls glimmered with bioluminescent algae, casting the tunnels in perpetual green twilight. Great pillars carved with serpent sigils held the ceiling aloft. These catacombs housed relics of vanished ages, dormant geomantic conduits, the bones of honored warriors, and, most sacred of all, the spawning pools. Here, new life was shaped. Here, the future of Chaqua's armies breathed its first gasps. Here, no enemy had ever set foot, until now. A ripple of poisoned air drifted through the lowest tunnel, acrid and wrong. Warped fumes curled around stone columns, leaving oily trails. Footprints, hundreds of them, marred the once pristine floors. Clawed, frantic, dragging. Blood smeared across inscriptions, handprints sliding downward as if their owners were pulled into darkness. A chamber door, 12 tons of carved obsidian set into a gold glyph frame, hung broken on one hinge. Inside waited desecration. Warp filth floated on the surface of the spawning pool like a macabre oil slick. Its sheen shimmered with sickly green and violet colors, drifting in swirling spirals that hissed faintly. Tadpoles, half-formed, skinks and saurus bobbed lifelessly, their translucent bodies clouded and bloated. And hunched over the water, lapping at it with hooked tongues, were skaven. Dozens of them. Some smeared their fur with the glowing pollutant, others scooped it into jars. A few simply danced in manic circles, cackling. One clan rat dipped its claw into the pool, watching the warp filth cling to its skin. It gazed reverently at the mutation, spreading up its arm, new growths, new potential. "Bless, bless," it squealed. "Good, good gifts. Yes, yes." A whip cracked across its back. A storm vermin overseer hissed, "Fool things! Take the filth to the next pool. Spread, spread. Corrupt break. The lizards cannot breed if all spawnlings rot die." And deeper in the chamber, 2 rat ogres lumbered. Their bodies bulged with crude warp augmentations, extra limbs sewn at wrong angles, ribs replaced with metal braces, eyes glowing green. One dragged a broken temple attendant by the leg. The corpse bumped lifelessly against the stone. The ogres threw the body into the warp-poisoned water. It sank without splash. Above, the ceiling vibrated a distant thunder. Chaqua shook under the violence of civil war and Skaven tunneling. Dust rained down. One Skaven looked up nervously. Lizard things fighting each other. Good, good. Easy kill, kill. None of them sensed the presence approaching through the water. None heard the rumble. None saw the shadow until it was too late. A croxigor burst from the submerged tunnel like a breaching leviathan. Water exploded outward, drenching Skaven and extinguishing their torches. The croxigor's massive claws closed around the nearest rat ogre before it could react. Bones snapped. The ogre shrieked as the croxigor wrenched its arm free, hurling the limb across the chamber. The storm vermin stared in shock, halberd half raised. From the tunnel behind the croxigor emerged Saurus guards, their eyes glowing with fury. They moved like scaled statues brought to life, disciplined, unstoppable, jaws clenched and blades drawn. Karok was not with them. He fought in the wetlands, but his kin had heard the tremors and come quietly. Ruthlessly, the lead Saurus roared, voice echoing through the vault like thunder underwater. Purge the filth. The Skaven reacted instantly. Chaos erupted. Clanrats swarmed the Saurus line, stabbing and screeching. The confined space amplified every noise, making the battle assault the senses. Saurus blades cut arcs through the murk, hacking rat bodies in half. Tails swished, skulls cracked, blood splattered across ancient glyphs. More Skaven rushed in through gaps in the shattered walls, grey forms scrabbling, snarling, driven by panic and hate. A storm vermin swung its halberd at a Saurus neck. The blow scraped across armored scales but failed to cut deep. The Saurus retaliated with a tooth-studded makua that shattered the rat's mask and embedded in its skull. The storm vermin fell twitching. The croxigor lunged again, smashing through a cluster of clan rats. Their bones cracked like twigs beneath its bulk. The remaining rat ogre bellowed and charged. The 2 giants collided, splashing waves of tainted water. They wrestled, claws raking flesh and metal. The rat ogre tore at the croxigor's throat, The Croxagore headbutted it so hard its snout flattened and teeth shot from its mouth. Warp energy sparked from the ogre's augmentations. The Croxagore roared as electricity coursed through its muscles, but instead of falling, it seized both sides of the rat ogre's head and pulled. The ogre's skull peeled apart like overripe fruit. Its corpse toppled into the spawning pool, sending ripples of corrupted water across dormant eggs. The Croxagore sagged, smoke curling from its scales. It bellowed in pain, but kept fighting. At the far end of the vault, near a massive shell-encrusted relic pillar, Saurus guards clashed with a weapon team dragging a warp grinder. The machine's gnashing drill spun wildly, chewing through stone as the Skaven squealed encouragement. Grind drill, break the vault. Flood, flood, kill all. A Saurus hurled his shield at the machine. It struck the warp grinder's intake vent with a heavy clang. The device sputtered, choked, then backfired, sending shards of white-hot metal spraying. 2 Skaven were impaled in an instant, but the drill still spun, still advanced, still tore the floor open. Saurus guards leapt as the stone beneath them collapsed. One was swallowed by the widening gap, disappearing into darkness with only one startled hiss. Another caught the ledge with a single claw and hauled himself up. The third Saurus did not dodge fast enough. His foot was shredded by the grinder. He snarled, struck the warp grinder with all his strength, and finally toppled it into the abyss. It fell like a meteor, spiraling into blackness. Seconds later, an explosion boomed from below. Dust erupted upward. The tunnel floor quaked, threatening to drop everyone into the cavernous depths beneath. More Skaven poured in. Not clan rats this time. Gudo runners. They came skittering across the walls and ceiling, silent as spiders. Their eyes gleamed. Their knives dripped green. The first dropped behind a Saurus and slit his throat in one smooth motion. The Saurus didn't even collapse. He choked on blood, stumbled, and turned to strike, but his limbs weakened. More gutter runners descended. Croxagore bellowed and swatted one from the wall, crushing it against stone, but another darted past him, stabbing both knives into his thigh. The Croxagore roared and swung blindly, smashing a pillar hard enough to make dust rain down like fog. The guards were being overrun. Their numbers were too few, the tunnels were too tight, and the Skaven were endless. A Saurus sergeant barked a command. Form, wall, even underwater, even choking on warp fumes. The Saurus obeyed. They pressed shoulder to shoulder, shields outward, forming an impenetrable barrier in front of the spawning pool. Their breath came heavy, their wounds leaked, but their eyes burned with unwavering purpose. No rat would pass, not while a scale still clung to their bodies. Clan rats broke upon the shield wall like a wave on rock. Screeches filled the air, bodies piled, shields splintered, tails were severed. The water ran dark red. Gutter runners darted behind pillars, striking from shadows, but the Saurus swung wide, catching them mid-lunge, cleaving them in two. Still the rats came. Still the Saurus stood, and then the vault shook again. This tremor was not distant. It was present immediate. The floor rippled. The pool sloshed violently. Sacred water spilled across the stone tiles. At the far end of the chamber, a wall bulged outward. Stone cracked, splintered, shattered. Something huge forced its way inside, a monstrosity of wood, iron, rope, and warpstone. A tunneling engine, a Skaven burrowing machine, its drill head taller than a Croxagore. Its blade spun, spewing dust and sparks. Its crew chittered excitedly. Break the vault. Smash drown the spawn things. The Saurus shield wall braced for impact. The drill lurched forward. Croxagore roared and threw himself at the machine. He slammed into it with enough force to dent the metal casing, but not enough to stop it. Warpstone flared, sending crackling tendrils of energy across his scales. The Croxigo convulsed. The drill surged. The shield wall cracked. Saurus were thrown backwards, some into walls, some into each other, some into the corrupted spawning pool. The water hissed loudly as their bodies splashed into it. The corruption clung to scales like living tar. A Saurus screamed, his voice breaking into a gurgling roar as warp filth burned through his armor and flesh. He thrashed wildly and sank. The Croxigor staggered to his knees, smoking and trembling. The drill surged one more time, and then stopped, not by choice, by force. A Saurus captain armor shattered. Jaw cracked had leapt onto the machine's side. His claws dug into metal creases. His blade plunged into exposed gears again and again. Sparks erupted with each strike. Warpstone hissed. The engine shrieked, and finally, with a grinding howl, it collapsed inward. The drill head bent. The engine seized. Smoke belched from vents. The crew inside screamed as the machine caved. The vault shook as the device collapsed. Silence followed. A terrible, heavy silence, broken only by Skaven dying breaths and Saurus growls of pain. The few surviving Skaven fled into cracks, tunnels, shadows. The Saurus did not chase. They stood amidst ruin. A half-collapsed vault, a spawning pool tainted beyond salvation, bodies of their brothers drifting in fouled water. The Croxigor slumped beside the shattered machine, chest heaving. The Saurus captain dragged himself upright. "Report," he rasped. One guard stepped forward, bleeding heavily. 2 pools lost, 3 chambers breached, enemy numbers greater than expected. Here hesitated. More tunnels open below. More Skaven will come. The captain nodded once. Then we seal what we can and hold the rest. He looked at the desecrated pool, face unreadable, until death. The Croxigor lifted his head and rumbled in agreement. Above them, distant, muffled by layers of ancient stone, came the faint echoes of riots, shouting, "Fire!" Chaqua was tearing itself apart, and beneath its foundations, the rats were already feasting. The Saurus guards tightened their grips, blood running down their weapons. There would be no reinforcements, no rest, only the next wave, and the next, and the next, until the vaults were reclaimed, or the Under-Empire swallowed everything. Chapter T. The Slan Awakens. Briefly, the sacred pyramid of Lord Chaquten had not trembled in an age. For 216 cycles, the Slan mage priest had remained upon his floating palanquin in perfect stillness, neither breathing nor dreaming in any mortal sense, but drifting in a silent cosmic meditation that stretched across centuries. His chamber was a mausoleum of living stone, lit only by cold star globes and drifting motes of geomantic energy that pulsed like slow, ancient heartbeats. No footstep had dared to echo here for generations. No disturbance had so much as brushed his chamber peacefully. Until now, far below, Chaqua was screaming. Fires roared in the lower districts. Skink fought skink across sacred terraces, their blood filling the grooves carved by the old ones. Ziggurats cracked under tremors as Skaven burrows split the earth. The jungle canopy glowed red from warp flares exploding in the wetlands. Civil war and invasion raged together in monstrous harmony. The vibrations reached even the Slan's chamber. A ripple passed through the air, like a tremor of thought. A single mote of floating geomantic light flickered erratically. Then another, then all of them. The vast stone doors of the chamber, carved with constellations older than the world, groaned faintly. Dust cascaded from their frames in thin, whispering streams. Lord Chaqua stirred, not visibly at first. His heavy-lidded eyes remained closed, his limbs slack, his ancient skin etched with runes of power that glowed only faintly, but the air itself seemed to draw inward, tightening around him as if the entire chamber inhaled sharply. A skink attendant named Paolo, who had remained in silent vigil for untold years, felt the aura shift. His frill snapped open in alarm. "My lord." But before he could speak again, the Slan's eyes snapped open. Two vast, golden orbs flared in the dim light, no longer dull, but bright as twin suns. Paolo collapsed instantly, overwhelmed by the raw psychic force radiating from the ancient being. His body spasmed under the weight of it. Tears streamed from his eyes. The chamber's temperature plummeted. Lord Chaqua did not blink. He did not breathe. He simply was, in a presence so total that the stones themselves hummed with recognition. And far, far below, in the blood-soaked plazas of Chaqua, reality changed. Chaqua was locked in furious combat. His jade staff spun in his claws as he fought to stave off a trio of red-crested zealots. One lunged for his throat. He parried. Another swung low. He deflected with his tail. The third struck from behind, but a traditionalist guard barreled into the attacker, sending both to the ground. All around them, the plaza bled. Bodies littered the serpent carvings. Fires roared up the side of one ziggurat. Oil jars shattered across plaques. Traditionalists defended their sacred grounds with desperate ferocity. Cultists fought with wild, ecstatic zeal. Xiltlak himself stood atop a low altar, calling out orders and prophecies in the same breath. His eyes gleamed with violent triumph. The serpent tests us. The weak fall. Rise, blood tide, rise. We must stop him, Chaqua shouted to his guards. But the red crests kept coming. A fanatical skink hurled himself at Chaqua with no regard for life. The staff tip broke his ribs, but he clawed at Chaqua's arm even as he died. Blood splattered across the tiles. On the opposite end of the city, deep beneath the ziggurats, Saurus and Croxigor still fought Skaven in the vaults. Warpstone lit the darkness. Rat ogres bellowed and were drowned. Clan rats clawed into holy pools. Pillars cracked. Ceilings shook. The entire city trembled and then froze. Every creature, lizard man and Skaven alike, felt it. A presence. A pressure. A vast mind stirring. The geomantic web surrounding Chaqua surged, glowing brighter than any living skink had ever seen. Blue-white lines of power raced across the ziggurats, igniting ancient glyphs that had slept for millennia. The air thrummed. And then, a shock wave. Invisible, soundless, instant. It washed across Chaqua like the breath of a god. Chaqua staggered backward as the force hit him. His vision went white. His limbs locked. His heart stuttered inside his chest. Around him, hundreds of skinks collapsed, some screaming, some gasping, some merely stunned into absolute stillness. The cultists froze in place, mid-swing. Traditionalists dropped their weapons. A dozen skinks fell to their knees, as if struck by divine command. Fire crackled, but even the flames seemed subdued. Above, on a higher terrace, Chaqua watched as Xiltlak clutched his head, eyes bulging in confusion and pain. "No, what is this? This is not—" His words choked as a wave of psychic force dragged him to his knees. Across the entire city, every lizard man felt the mind of the Slan awaken like a blazing star behind their eyes. The Saurus still locked in bloody struggle with Skaven, froze mid-strike. Their claws trembled. Some dropped to one knee automatically, ancient instincts overriding combat. A rat ogre, confused, halted its charge, letting a Kroxigor collapse onto it, crushing both under falling stone. The Skaven squealed in fear. Magic mind, mage thing, awake, awake, retreat, retreat, retreat. Their cries echoed uselessly against the vault walls, but the Slan's awakening was not meant for them. It was for his children, for Chaqua, and it was not gentle. In the chamber, Paolo writhed on the floor as Lord Chakuten's mind expanded outward. The palanquin floated slightly higher, reacting to the surge of energy coursing through the ancient being. Then the Slan spoke, or rather, the Slan projected. His voice did not arrive through ears. It arrived through bone, blood, thought, a single word, a command, echoing across every level of the city. Unite. It struck like a blow. Tlacora inhaled sharply as the word thundered through his skull. His vision cleared instantly. His heartbeat steadied. He rose to his feet, eyes blazing with a renewed clarity. Zealtlak convulsed on the stones, clutching his head. Blood leaked from his nostrils. His zeal seemed to crack under the psychic force. No, Sotek. Sotek spoke to me, not you, not. But the Slan's mind drowned his protests. Or perish. The second word hit harder. All skinks screamed. Saurus dropped fully to their knees, shaking under the force. Some fell into the mud with bone-jarring thuds. Kroxigor clutched their skulls and roared. Even the Skaven felt fragments of the psychic weight. Gutter runners fell twitching. One storm vermin clawed at its eyes until they burst. Warp sparks crackled in the vaults. Spawn tunnels shuddered. Zealtlak collapsed fully, howling in agony. His staff shattered under his grip. Sotek, save me. Tlacora staggered toward him, barely able to walk through the psychic storm. Then, silence. Instant, total, as though a switch had been pulled. The Slan's eyes dimmed again. His aura faded. The chamber above grew still. Lord Chakuten fell back into ancient meditation. His brief awakening, the first in centuries, was over, but its mark remained on every soul in Chaqua. In the plaza, dozens of skinks knelt dazed, gasping. Blood pooled beneath them from earlier wounds, but no new violence followed. Traditionalists looked at cultists. Cultists looked at traditionalists. Both sides trembled. Even fanatics lowered their weapons. Zealtlak slowly lifted his head. His frill drooped. His eyes were wild, unfocused. The psychic command still echoed inside him, clashing violently with the serpent whispers that had once guided him. His voice broke as he whispered, "The Slan speaks?" Tlacora approached him, gripping his staff. "Yes," he said quietly. "He speaks, and his command is clear." Zealtlak's trembled. Sotek. Sotek did not intervene, Tlacora replied, but the Slan did, and he has decided. A ripple of fear passed through the cultists. A ripple of shame passed through the traditionalists. No side looked victorious. No side looked righteous. They all looked broken, and beneath them the stone trembled once more as Skaven dug upward relentlessly. Their war machines churned. Their verminous hordes screeched. Tlacora turned toward the trembling city. The enemy does not slow. They come, whether we unite or tear each other apart. He looked at Zealtlak. The prophet bowed his head, unwilling or unable to answer. but neither did he raise his weapon. Not yet. Chaqua stared outward, frill lifting with grim resolve. The Slan has spoken, he said. Unite or perish. Behind him, the rumble of Skaven tunneling grew louder. Closer, hungrier. The reprieve the Slan had granted them was temporary and fleeting. Chapter 11. Siege of the Serpent City. Dawn never truly came to Chaqua that day. The jungle canopy was a smothered mass of shadow, the air thick with an unnatural haze that turned the rising sun into a sickly, bruised smear. Fog clung low over the terraces, green-tinged and foul-smelling, tasting of rust and bile. The tremors beneath the city had grown constant now, a dull, ceaseless grinding, as if some colossal beast gnawed on the foundations of the world. On the outermost causeways, where ancient stone met the jungle's rotting fringe, the defenders waited. Saurus cohorts stood in disciplined ranks, shields raised, spears angled outward. Their scales were slick with the humidity, their muscles coiled under heavy armor. They did not speak, they did not shift. They simply watched. Behind them, skink cohorts rushed back and forth, placing obsidian-tipped javelins in carved racks, checking bronze dart-throwers, unfurling small banner-glyphs. Their frills quivered with barely restrained fear. Traditionalist blues stood shoulder to shoulder with red-crested followers of Sotek, their glares occasionally flashing sideways, but their weapons pointed outward toward the creeping jungle shadow. For now, the Slan's command still held. Unite or perish. A distant rumble rolled through the trees. The ground trembled. The jungle moved. At first, it seemed like wind branches shaking, fronds quivering. Then the motion thickened, darkened. Underbrush shuddered, toppled. Small beasts shrieked and fled in all directions. And then they saw the first of them. Clan rats poured from the tree line, thousands upon thousands, like a living, shrieking mass of fur and teeth and rusted iron. They surged across the marshy ground toward Chaqua's causeways, tails lashing, eyes glowing in the half-light. Some scuttled on all fours, others upright, waving jagged spears, others still dragging crude shields made from scavenged bone and metal. Behind them, more shapes lumbered through the trees. Zegatoas, Skaven siege towers tall, ramshackle monstrosities of splintered wood, scavenged stone, and iron braces. They creaked and groaned under their own weight, pushed and dragged by chains of straining ratmen. Warpstone lanterns swung from their sides, bathing them in an unholy emerald glow. And at the heart of the horde, rolling slowly on creaking wheels, came a screaming bell. It loomed above the swarm, a corroded bell of impossible size, encrusted with verdigris and festering sigils. It hung in a mangled frame of bone and warped timber, pulled by a team of blind albino rat ogres, driven forward by whip-wielding handlers. Little Skaven priests in rusted half-masks clung to its frame, chanting in reedy, hysterical voices. Ring, ring, break stone, break lizard things. Praise Horned One, yes, yes. The defenders watched it come. Chaqua stood upon a high terrace, hands clasped around his staff so tightly the carved jade bit into his palms. His gaze tracked the screaming bell, his frill pressed flat. Beside him, Giltlak leaned on his serpent-etched spear, eyes ablaze with a grim, unsettling hunger. "The serpent brings us a worthy test," Giltlak murmured. "The serpent brings us nothing," Chaqua replied. "Our enemies do." He lifted his staff. "All units," he hissed into the air, voice amplified by the geomantic web that still thrummed beneath Chaqua's wounded stone. "Prepare!" The causeways bristled. Saurus lowered their spears. Skinks raised javelins and dart throwers. Croxigor lumbered into place, their massive forms hunched beneath the weight of huge stone clubs and carved pillar fragments repurposed as battering implements. Their eyes were simple and solemn. They did not understand civil strife, psychic decrees, or the politics of cults. They understood walls. They understood things that came to break them. Another tremor rippled underfoot. Dust slid from carvings, sprinkling the defender's scales in pale grit. The screaming bell rolled to a halt just beyond the range of the first javelin volleys. From his terrace, Chaqua saw Skaven priests exchange nods. Then one, taller than the others, raised a staff crackling with warp energy. The bell began to swing. Once, twice. On the third arc, it struck its frame hard enough to make reality shudder. The sound wasn't merely heard. It was felt. A single, hideous note detonated across the battlefield. A bellowing, ripping scream of metal and soul that seemed to hook claws into the mind and tear. The very air vibrated. The jungle shuddered. The geomantic lines around Chaqua spasmed like wounded nerves. Saurus flinched, their disciplined formation jolting. Skinks clutched at their heads, some collapsing to their knees with shrill cries. Along the outer wall, a crack leapt along a carved serpent relief, splitting it from fanged snout to coiled tail. The screaming bell's note faded, but its echo lingered inside skulls and stone. Again chittered one of the Skaven priests. "Ring, ring until the stones fall." The bell swung again. Another mind-breaking peal tore through the air. This time the outer wall itself shivered violently. A section buckled. A decorative parapet broke free and tumbled down, smashing into the causeway below in a thunder of debris. A few Saurus disappeared beneath it without a sound. The clan rats squealed with manic joy and surged forward. "No, tlacoraroret," Chaqua answered. The first volley of javelins rained down from the terraces, sleek obsidian-tipped spears whistling through the air. They punched into the front ranks of Skaven with satisfying, wet impacts. Ratmen staggered, shrieked, and fell, impaling their fellows behind them. From rooftop firing lanes, Skinks unleashed clouds of poisoned darts. The projectiles were small and fast, nearly invisible until they hit fur and flesh. Where they struck, rats twitched, foamed, and collapsed in spasms as venom worked its way inward. But still the swarm pushed on. Skaven ran over the fallen, using them as fresh footing. The first wave hit the base of the causeways and threw themselves at the stone, claws scratching uselessly. Others began to clamber up on stacked corpses, their numbers forming living ladders. From behind them, globadiers advanced in loose, hopping lines, Skaven encased in hissing leather suits, their faces hidden behind enclosed masks. Long glass globes of swirling green filth cradled in their claws. They reached throwing distance and began to pitch their globes high. The sky filled with arcs of sickly glass. The first globe shattered across a skink firing line on the third terrace. Green vapor billowed, thick and clinging. The skinks screamed, dropped their weapons, clawed at their faces as their scales blistered and sloughed away. Some staggered blindly and fell off the terrace, their bodies hitting the lower steps with wet cracks. Another globe burst near a Saurus formation. The larger lizard men fared better, their thicker hides held longer, but even they coughed and staggered, eyes watering, muscles cramping as the gas burned their lungs. A few moments were all the Skaven needed. "Ladders! Push! Push!" shrieked a packmaster. Wooden ramps and haphazard ladders thrown together from jungle logs, bone, and scrap metal were shoved forward, slamming against the outer walls. Skaven swarmed up them, claws gripping each rung with desperate ferocity. Croxigor bellowed. One stepped forward in a lumbering charge, gripping a carved pillar fragment in both hands. With a roar, it swung the pillar sideways like a battering ram. The nearest ladder splintered under the blow, Skaven bodies flung away like broken insects. Another ladder followed, then a third, the makeshift siegeworks crumbling under the Croxigor's savage strength. A Globadier's throne globe struck the Croxigor's chest. The glass shattered. Green poison splashed. The Croxigor shrieked a horrifying sound, high and panicked. Flesh sizzled. Its huge hands clawed at its own torso, digging through melting scales. It staggered backward, convulsed, and fell heavily onto a group of advancing Skaven, crushing them even as it died in a steaming, toxic heap. The other Croxigor roared, enraged, and threw themselves into the work with renewed ferocity. On the causeways, Saurus met the first Skaven climbers. A clan rat scrambled over the crenellation, eyes wide and crazed. It barely had time to squeak before a Saurus spear impaled it through the chest, lifting it clear of the stone. The body twitched for a heartbeat, then went limp. Another Skaven leapt forward, gnashing. A Saurus shield slammed into its face, breaking teeth and nose. It tumbled backward, knocking several climbers from the ladder. "Hold," grunted a Saurus captain. "Kill, hold, kill." It was as much doctrine as command. Above the causeways, on the higher terraces, skinks of both factions loosed volley after volley into the seething mass below. Red-crested Sotek devotees screamed their god's name as they fired. Traditionalist priests hummed old battle prayers under strained breaths. Their quarrel was not forgotten, but it was buried, for now, under an avalanche of rat flesh. The screaming bell tolled again. Stone cracked. A section of the outer wall, already cracked from previous strikes, finally gave. It sheared away with a groan, collapsing outward in a spray of dust and rubble. Skaven shrieked as they were crushed beneath the falling masonry, but in the wake of its collapse, a breach lay open. The swarm poured toward it. "Close it!" Tlacora's voice thundered across the geomantic tongue lines, rattling inside the skull of every Saurus captain. "Form! Form!" Karok heard the command as he led his cohort up the sloped causeway toward the breach. His armor was still smeared with bog mud and rat blood from the wetlands. Dried gore flaked from his scales as he moved. His eyes locked on the gap. "Forward!" he rumbled to his warriors. They accelerated from a marching stride to an earth-shaking charge. Skaven swarms rushed through the breach, shrieking in triumph. Their celebration died as Karok's cohort slammed into them like a living avalanche. Saurus spears punched through fur and bone. Heavy shields crushed skulls. Karok's mace rose and fell, each swing a death. He cracked ribs, pulped skulls, shattered spines. A rat ogre tried to force its way through the breach above the swarm. Karok pivoted and smashed its knee. The beast stumbled. 3 Saurus speared it together, driving their blades through its chest until its heart was pulp. The breach clogged with corpses. The Saurus did not relent. Behind them, skinks climbed to higher firing points, using carved serpent heads and decorative spires as perches. They rained darts and javelins down onto any Skaven trying to climb the pile of dead. For a moment, the breach held. The screaming bell tolled again. This time, the sound cracked several of the inner buttresses. A serpent statue toppled from a higher terrace, smashing a chunk of the parapet away. Saurus scrambled to avoid the crash. One was too slow. The statue flattened him, leaving only a smear of blue scales and blood. The Skaven priests howled with laughter. See? Stone fall, city crack. They urged the albino rat ogres forward, whipping them until blood streamed from their backs. The bell swung higher, Its next impact resonated so violently that the very air seemed to blur. On a mid-level terrace, skinks dropped their weapons and clutched their heads in agony. Some threw themselves off ledges to escape the sound, falling to their deaths. On the highest tier, between stone obelisks humming with pale energy, Chaqua staggered, his vision splintered. The slan's faint psychic aura flickered around him, muted, strained. The ancient mage priest would not wake again so soon. The shockwaves from the bell battered against even his distant trance. "We must silence it," Chaqua growled, yaw clenched. Beside him, Ziltlak stared at the bell with narrowed eyes. "Then aim the serpent's wrath there," he said. "Give me command of the red crests on the western terraces. Let us strike in Sotek's name." Chaqua wanted to argue. He wanted to deny the fanatic. But the screaming bell tolled again, and the sacred stones of Chaqua wailed in answer, and his city bled from 100 cracks. "Go," he snarled. "Take them. Bring that abomination down or die under it." Ziltlak grinned, exposing filed fangs. "As Sotek wills," he hissed. He turned and sprinted along the terrace, rallying red-crested skinks with sharp gestures and hissing battle cries. They followed eagerly, weapons gleaming, eyes alight with the ecstasy of sanctioned slaughter. "For Sotek," they howled. "For Chaqua," Chaqua muttered. Below, the siege raged on. Globadiers shifted their focus to the inner terraces now, lobbing their hateful globes higher, further. One shattered against a carved serpent frieze, dousing it in writhing green fumes. The stone blackened and cracked. A pair of skinks behind it had only time to screech before their scales blistered and peeled. They collapsed into bubbling heaps. Warp lightning cannons rolled into position behind the Skaven lines, dragged by barbed chains. Their crews chittered frantically, adjusting twisted lenses and unstable coils. A priest slapped one gunner. More power, yes. Break the big ziggurat." They cranked the machine until its warpstone heart blazed like a chunk of stolen star. A spear of green lightning blasted forth, striking a mid-tier wall. The stone exploded. Skinks and Saurus together were hurled aside, charred to crackling husks. But the weapons sagged afterward, smoke pouring from its vents. One of the crewmen's heads burst like an overripe fruit. Skaven laughed anyway. The siege towers finally reached the base of the walls. Their crude rams hammered against vulnerable sections, sending chips of stone flying. Other towers extended spiked gangplanks toward terraces, rattling into place with terrifying speed. Croxigol braced to receive them. One siege tower ground to a halt, its warped wheels churning in the churned mud. A dozen storm vermin stood ready upon its upper platform, halberds raised. The gangplank slammed down onto the terrace with a juddering thud. A Croxigor met the first storm vermin with a roar, his massive club smashing the rat in half. Two more lunged, claws scraping the giant's flank. The Croxigor seized both by their heads and slammed them together until their skulls popped. He turned, lifted his club, and swung it full force into the base of the siege tower. The ramshackle structure groaned. For a heartbeat, it tilted. Then the entire tower toppled sideways. Storm vermin and globadiers screamed as they were thrown headlong through the air. The twisted mass of wood and metal crashed into the Skaven ranks below, crushing dozens. Warpstone lanterns shattered, spewing volatile fire that consumed rats and timber alike. The Croxigor bellowed in triumph, then staggered as a lightning bolt from a warp cannon struck him square in the chest. His body spasmed, smoked, and fell without a sound. There was no room for mourning, only more killing. Street by street, terrace by terrace, Platform by platform, Chaqua became a labyrinth of close-quarter slaughter. Saurus engaged Skaven in narrow corridors where the rats' numbers could not fully envelop them. Skinks darted from shadow to shadow, striking from above with darts, slings, and sudden javelins. Red crests hurled themselves into the thickest fighting, heedless of life. Traditionalists held defensive choke points with grim determination. In one alley, cultists and old ways skinks stood back to back as a tide of ratmen surged toward them. Their earlier hatred turned outward for a single desperate hour. Every victory cost blood. Every step gained left corpses behind. The screaming bell tolled again, and a crack split the side of the largest ziggurat from base to mid-tier. Statues toppled. An entire flight of stairs broke, dropping Skaven and lizardmen alike into the chasm. On the western terraces, Zealtlak and his chosen red crests gathered in the looming shadow of the bell's frame. "For the serpent," he shouted. "For the Slan's command. For Chaqua." They surged forward through the smoke and chaos as the screaming bell swung its next murderous arc. The siege of the Serpent City had fully begun, and no one, not Slan, not Skink, not Saurus, could say who would still stand when the last note finally died. Chapter 12. The Price of Unity. Chaqua burned. Fires crawled along the edges of ziggurats like glowing serpents, hissing as they devoured ancient stonework. Smoke ascended in thick, writhing coils that smothered the sky, blending into the unnatural haze of warp exhaust rising from Skaven weapon engines. The screaming bell still tolled its malignant rhythm across the city, each peal cracking stone, rattling bones, and fraying sanity. Saurus formations fought in the plazas, silhouettes moving through swirling smoke like statues in motion. Skink cohorts loosed poison darts from rooftops, targeting the endless vermin swarms scrambling over toppled glyph walls. Kroxigor smashed siege towers into splinters, their roars swallowed by war. The Serpent City was dying in sound and fury, and in a chamber deep beneath the central ziggurat lit by flickering torchlight and the glow of half-shattered geomantic glyphs, Tlak stood face to face with the one skink he least wished to see alive. Tlak, the red-crested prophet, was covered in blood, some his own, most not. His crest was torn, one eye wept crimson, and scorched scales covered one side of his chest where a warp globe had burst. Yet even wounded, his eyes burned with fanatical clarity. The zealot's followers knelt in a semicircle behind him, chests heaving with exhaustion, fear, and fervor. Tlak was not alone. 2 Saurus guards towered behind him, weapons dripping with Skaven filth. Their breathing was deep and steady, their tails twitching in anticipation of violence. But there was no fighting here. Not yet. The air between Tlak and Zealtlak vibrated with something heavier than threat, something like fate straining against its bindings. The prophet gestured toward the chamber's center, where a massive circular relief lay carved into the floor, a spiral serpent devouring serpent motif, its grooves now filled with smeared blood. "It is time," Zealtlak rasped. "Time to unleash the god who answers our cries." Tlakora's frill rose sharply. "You dare bring me here to witness another of your heresies while the city burns?" Zealtlak barked a bitter laugh. Heresy. The heresy was waiting, watching, whispering prayers while the rats crawled through our sanctums and feasted on our spawn. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You know as well as I, we cannot hold Chaqua, not with steel alone, not while the screaming bell breaks our walls and the Under-Empire vomits forth legions." The prophet gestured at the blood-filled relief. "But Sotek can." Tlak stiffened. "I saw his avatar once. he murmured. What you summoned before was not Sotek, only a twisted echo of your own zeal. Ziltlak bared his fangs. Because the ritual was incomplete, because I lacked the one thing needed to bring his true form into this world. And what is that? Tlakora asked, though dread coiled in his gut. Ziltlak leaned forward. Mass sacrifice. Silence froze the chamber. The fires beyond the ziggurat roared faintly, like distant breath. Tlakora felt the air thin. Ziltlak continued, slowly, deliberately. Sotek answers only to blood, the offering of many given willingly or unwillingly. Hundreds, perhaps thousands. The power of such a tide would drown the screaming bell, tear apart the skaven root hives, and purge every verminous stain with serpent fire. He spread his arms wide, as if already embracing the carnage to come. It is the price of unity. A shudder went through Tlakora, not of fear, but of rage. You would slaughter your own people, your own blood, while we stand on the brink of annihilation? Ziltlak smiled with terrible serenity. I would save our people. Sacrifice is the oldest law of the serpent. Skinks have always bled so the sorus may fight. This is no different, merely larger, grander, divine in scale. The Slan forbade such rituals, Tlakora hissed. The Slan sleeps, Ziltlak countered, dreaming of plans older than our city's bones. Sotek is awake. The Slan woke, Tlakora reminded him, stepping forward. He commanded unity, not slaughter. Ziltlak shrugged. Unity of purpose, unity of sacrifice. Do not twist divine intent. Tlakora's staff crackled with suppressed energy. The Saurus behind him tensed, claws gripping weapons. One of Ziltlak's cultists rose shakily. We are willing, Lord Tlakora, she murmured. Our lives mean nothing next to the serpent's fury. Another stood beside her. We will give our blood, all of us, and if hundreds more are needed, Tlakora demanded, you would drag them to the altar? Hatchlings? Priests? Cohort leaders? Survivors of battle? Ziltlak did not flinch. Yes, the word struck the chamber like a blow. Tlakora's voice dripped venom. You would butcher Chaqua to save it. I would butcher Chaqua to ensure it rises anew, Ziltlak corrected softly. A brighter city, a blood temple reborn, one truly loyal to Sotek's flames. And what of the old ones? Tlakora asked. What of the plan? What of? Ziltlak snapped. Sotek is the plan, he roared, spittle flecking the stones. He is the new directive, the one who answers now, when your ancient ghosts remain silent. His crest flared with fresh fury. You cling to old laws and old stone. I adapt. I survive. I offer our city a serpent's rebirth. Tlakora's frill shimmered with cold fury. You offer us extinction. We are already dying, Ziltlak screamed. Look outside. Look at the walls cracking, the ziggurats collapsing. Listen to the screaming bell shredding our defenses. Smell the warp filth dripping into our spawning pools. This city is dead already. He thrust a claw toward the floor relief. Unless we make a choice bold enough to shatter doom. Silence stretched. The Saurus guards behind Tlakora exchanged uneasy glances. They did not fully understand the argument, but they recognized the stakes. Beyond the chamber walls, the war's voice grew louder, the shriek of Skaven warp fire, the booming collapse of another terrace, the distant roar of a Kroxigor falling in battle, the hiss of poisoned wind. Tlakora closed his eyes. He saw the vaults drowning in corrupted water, He saw Saurus dying by the hundreds, fighting tunnels choked with rat flesh. He saw skink defenders choking on warp fumes. He saw the screaming bell splitting Chaqua like a cracked egg. He saw his failures, but he also saw the future Ziltlak promised. A city reborn in blood, a god fed by sacrifice, a serpent that devoured not vermin, but lizard men themselves. He opened his eyes again. Ziltlak stared, unblinking, waiting for either blessing or wrath. "You would slaughter Chaqua," Tlakora said quietly, "and call it salvation." Ziltlak nodded once. "I would do whatever is needed, and you would force us all to share your delusion." "I would force unity," Ziltlak corrected, stepping closer. "Unity is not always gentle. Sometimes it is carved. Sometimes it is bled." Tlakora lifted his staff slightly. Energy crackled along its carved lines. "And if I refuse?" Ziltlak smiled darkly. "Then Chaqua burns, the Skaven feast on our corpses, and your slan dreams in a grave of ruined stone." He paused, "And when the last light fades, Sotek will know you denied him." Tlakora's heart pounded. His claws tightened around his staff. The Saurus behind him shifted, unsure whether the next moment would erupt in blood. Ziltlak spread his arms again. "Let me summon him," he whispered. "Let me bring the serpent's fury into the waking world. Give me your blessing, or simply stand aside." A terrible thought rose in Tlakora like bile. What if Ziltlak succeeded? What if Sotek came? Could a true god be contained? Could any of them survive it? Even victory might mean annihilation. Tlakora stepped forward until he and Ziltlak were nose to nose. His voice was so quiet it seemed stolen. "You ask too much." Ziltlak's pupils widened into thin slits. "I ask what is necessary." Thunder cracked above. A ziggurat wall somewhere outside collapsed with a booming crash. The screaming bell tolled again so violently that dust rained down into the chamber like dying snow. Tlakora's frill rose and fell with indecision, rage, fear, duty, and the weight of a city's survival. Finally, he spoke. "We will not sacrifice Chaqua." Ziltlak's eyes gleamed with triumph. "We will preserve it." But the prophet's smile faded as Tlakora raised his staff and whispered the next words. "By stopping you." Ziltlak froze. His followers gasped or hissed. Some reached for weapons. Others hesitated, stunned by the sudden declaration. Tlakora planted his staff against the carved relief of the ritual circle. The grooves pulsed once, rejecting Ziltlak's touch, responding to Tlakora's authority. A web of geomantic lines lit up under the stone. Ward glyphs, banishment sigils, seals. "No," Ziltlak whispered, trembling with fury as he realized the meaning. "No, you cannot, you dare." Tlakora's voice rose. "You will not turn Chaqua into an altar." The chamber exploded into chaos. Ziltlak screamed in wordless rage and hurled himself forward, crimson spear aimed at Tlakora's throat. His cultists surged behind him. The Saurus guards roared. Stepping in front of their master, blood spilled onto the ritual circle. But blood would not summon Sotek tonight. Not this way. Not at this cost. For the price of unity would not be paid in slaughter. It would be paid in defiance. Chapter 13. The Serpent Unbound. The sky above Chaqua had turned the color of old blood. Smoke smeared the heavens in dark streaks, broken only by flashes of warp light and the silhouettes of falling bodies. Screams, skink, saurus, skaven mingled into a single, ragged chorus. The city that had stood since the dawn of the world was dying one shriek, one crack, one collapse at a time, and in the central plaza, the highest, holiest, now most defiled heart of Chaqua, the final calamity began. Chaqua staggered up the ziggurat steps, vision blurred by smoke and exhaustion. His frill hung limp, his chest heaving. Behind him, Saurus guards hacked through frenzied cultists and warp-crazed Skaven who had clawed their way into the sacred heart. Blood red, black, green, and iridescent ran in rivulets down the steps, steaming on contact with hot stone. He should not have let the fight drag this long. He should have killed Giltlak at the first opportunity, but now it was too late. The ritual circle atop the ziggurat was already burning. The sacrificial pyre, an ancient bowl of carved stone, wreathed in glyphs so old even Chaqua could not read them, had been filled to the brim with hacked bodies. Skinks, both willing cultists and unwilling victims, lay piled together in a grotesque mound. Blood ran thick and shiny down the grooves of the serpent relief, etched into the floor, pooling in the concentric channels. All of it burned. Blue flames devoured flesh and bone alike. Smoke billowed upward in greasy columns. The smell of choking, sweet rot made even Saurus gag. And standing before the pyre, arms raised in triumph, was Giltlak. His crest burned. Literal tongues of fire danced along his blood-soaked scales, swirling around him without consuming him. His single functional eye gleamed with wild, fevered brilliance. "You could not stop destiny, Chaqua," he shrieked, voice cracking. "Not with staff, not with fear, not with your old, dying laws." Chaqua raised his staff, but it felt like lifting a mountain. "You've doomed us all," he rasped. "No." Giltlak laughed a raw, broken sound. "I have saved us." He thrust both hands toward the pyre. The serpent glyphs ignited, the air warped, and something beneath the stone, something ancient, something hungry woke. A shockwave rippled outward from the ritual pit, knocking Skaven and lizardmen alike from their feet. The flames rose higher, twisting into a column of blood-red fire that spiraled toward the sky. The temperature soared. Stone cracked. The carved serpent's maw split apart, as if opening to vomit something from the world beneath. And from that flame, it formed. A shape coalesced first in smoke and fire, then in writhing translucence. A head serpentine but impossibly vast emerged from the pyre in a torrent of vapor and shrieking power. The jaws alone were as large as a temple gate. Fangs dripped molten light. Its eyes were burning pits of crimson void. A colossal, spectral serpent rose above the ziggurat. Red scales shimmered like blood-polished obsidian. Coils the width of terraces wound around the rising column of smoke. It was beautiful. It was monstrous. It was a god's shadow, or a god's nightmare. "Sotek!" Giltlak screamed, falling to his knees. "Blood Father, I call you. I have opened the path." The red serpent's head tilted, slowly, deliberately. Then it screamed. The sound was not noise, it was a tearing of reality. The air vibrated as though the world itself were wincing. Windows shattered throughout the city. Skinks clutched their heads and bled from their nostrils. Saurus staggered. Skaven went into fits, convulsing and biting their own tongues off. Then the serpent lunged. The first to die were Skaven, thousands of them. The serpent descended in a blur of crimson light, jaws yawning impossibly wide. It slammed into the massed Skaven swarms in the central plaza with enough force to shake the entire ziggurat. An explosion of red light engulfed the battlefield. Rats were lifted screaming into the air, torn apart by invisible fangs, swallowed whole, incinerated in coils of spectral fire. The screaming bell itself quivered. Warp priests howled in terror. Their chanting faltered as the red serpent's presence washed over them, burning away courage, burning away flesh. The bell began to ring unevenly, its resonance warped by divine interference. Saurus roared in savage relief. For a heartbeat, a single, fragile heartbeat, it felt as though Chaqua might survive. Then the serpent moved again, and it became clear. It was not bound. It was not controlled. It was not merciful. Its hunger was infinite, and everything that lived was food. A cohort of Saurus near the base of the ziggurat roared in victory as the serpent annihilated a Skaven storm vermin regiment, only for the divine coils to sweep backward, clipping the platform they stood on. They vanished. No noise, no blood, just gone consumed in a flash of red light. Cora stared in horror. No, no, no. It is not controlled. It is not guided. Ziltlak, what have you done? But the prophet was enraptured. Eyes rolled back, arms spread wide as the serpent began to coil around the ziggurat steps, crushing stone like brittle bone. He feeds, Ziltlak howled. He rises. He devours us, Chaqua shouted. But his voice was lost, because the serpent struck again. It surged across the plaza like a scythe of living flame. Skaven death globadiers evaporated mid-hiss. Rat ogres shrieked as their bodies burst into clouds of ash. Entire rows of clan rats were vacuumed into its roaring maw. But wherever Skaven died, lizardmen died with them. A group of skink blowdart scouts tried to retreat. The serpent's tail, if it could be called a tail, lashed sideways. The shockwave alone shattered their bodies, flinging fragments across the plaza. A Kroxigor charged bravely toward the serpent's coils, roaring a challenge. The red serpent turned its head, hovering, studying. Then it struck, and the Kroxigor vanished into radiant fire. At the screaming bell, chaos reigned. The Skaven priests screamed and clawed at each other, trying to escape the divine monstrosity. The albino rat ogres braced themselves against the bell frame, chittering in terror. Stop the bell! Kill the bell! Wake the horned one! But it was too late. The red serpent coiled around the bell as though strangling a rival deity. Warp light raced across its spectral scales. The bell's wood frame splintered. The bell itself cracked, then shattered. A wave of force blasted through Chaqua, tearing roof tiles free, blowing skinks from terraces, snapping trees at the roots, and the serpent roared in triumph. Skaven morale collapsed. They broke like water, but the serpent showed them no mercy. It hunted, it fed, it widened its coils, sweeping swathes of the city clean of rat flesh and scaled flesh alike. It slithered through streets, its body intangible yet lethal, its presence burning like a fever across reality. Saurus cohorts were scattered. Kroxigor lumbered backward, terrified. Skinks dropped their weapons and fled. Ziltlak crawled forward, reaching out to the god thing, tears of joy streaming down his burned face. My lord, my serpent, at last you answer my... The red serpent's coils tightened. Ziltlak froze. His eyes widened with a single shattering realization. It did not know him. It never had. It never would. Sotek, he whispered, voice cracking. The serpent swallowed him, a single gulp of red light. No ceremony, no recognition, no reward. Ziltlak was gone. Chaqua staggered backward, staff trembling in his claws. Every step he retreated, the serpent's shadow washed over him, its presence burning into his mind like a brand. He glimpsed visions, worlds drowned in red, cities reduced to bones, a serpent coiling around the heavens, devouring stars. This was not Sotek. This was not salvation. This was hunger made manifest. A predator drawn by ritual, not commanded by it. A god unchained. Chaqua whispered, knees buckling. We have birthed our doom. In present, the serpent turned its head sharply, as if hearing him. Its eyes, two pits of endless red, locked onto him. It saw him. It saw everything. And it moved. Fast. Chaqua raised his staff in feeble defiance. No, no, no! The serpent lunged. Its jaws engulfed half the ziggurat. Saurus threw themselves in front of Chaqua, roars turning to strangled screams as they were swept into the radiant maw. Stone exploded. The shockwave flung Chaqua across the terrace, slamming him into a broken pillar. Pain shot through his ribs. He tasted blood. The serpent rose again, impossibly vast, uncoiling toward the city's highest platforms. And now everyone understood. Lizard man, Skaven, cultist, priest, god. It was not an avatar. It was a catastrophe, and it would kill everything. The red serpent reared back, coils blotting out the burning sky. Chaqua trembled beneath it. A deep hum vibrated from its core, an intake of cosmic breath. It was about to strike again. At the city, at the defenders, at everything that lived, and no ritual circle could contain it. No prayer could soothe it. No army could resist it. Chaqua crawled to his feet, leaning on his staff. Blood dripped from his nostril. His vision wavered, but he remained standing, because if he fell, all of Chaqua would fall with him. The serpent screamed. The city shook. And the final battle for Chaqua began anew, not against Skaven, but against the god thing their own zeal had unleashed. Chapter 14. The Purge of the Burrows. The serpent's rampage had left the skies above Chaqua blazing like an inferno, but far beneath the ruined plazas, the light did not reach. Here, in the Skaven burrow network, the darkness was absolute. It smelled of rot, warp fumes, rust, and nesting filth. The tunnels trembled constantly, dust showering from ceilings that had been gnawed thin by generations of claw and tooth. Chittering echoed endlessly, a warped chorus of fear, fury, and confusion. For the first time in their scurrying history, the Skaven beneath Chaqua knew terror. And they knew the name of that terror, the red serpent. Whatever it truly was, whatever had been summoned above, its divine rampage had sent shockwaves through the earth itself. Tunnels collapsed, chambers imploded, burrow cities turned to rubble, entire nests were swallowed in an instant. Warpstone lamps shattered, plunging warrens into choking darkness. Even now, hours after the serpent had torn through the city above, the burrows still quivered, as if haunted by its passing. Amid the collapsing labyrinth, Karok marched, the Sora's veteran mud-caked, scar-slashed, armor cracked from countless battles led his combined force deeper into the Under-Empire's throat. His mace, chipped and blood-blackened, hung heavy at his side. His breath came out in sharp, controlled exhales, misting in the stale underground air. Behind him trudged his cohort, what remained of it. A few dozen Saurus warriors, their scales marred and weapons dulled by days of siege. Their once perfect discipline was frayed but intact. Their eyes gleamed coldly in the dark. Among them lumbered 3 Kroxigor, whose hulking forms cast shifting shadows against the burrow walls. Their heavy stone clubs had become coated in Skaven fur and brain matter. One Kroxigor still limped slightly from wounds inflicted during the serpent's destructive ascent, and interspersed among them were skink sappers, carrying satchels heavy with explosive glyph charges, etched stones humming with volatile geomantic power. Karok surveyed his warband, then the tunnels ahead. The air tasted wrong. Every instinct screamed danger. "Forward," he growled. The command rumbled through the cohort like grinding stone. The purge had begun. The first chamber they entered was a collapsed, Skaven muster hall. Jagged timbers and snapped bone scaffolds littered the floor. A crude icon of the horned rat lay shattered against the far wall, half buried under mounds of earth. Dead Skaven were everywhere, some crushed beneath falling stone, others suffocated by dirt, still others burned by lingering traces of the serpent's divine fire. Their bodies melted into grotesque, fused shapes. The skinks whispered prayers as they passed. The Saurus did not react. Karok knelt beside one warped corpse, its limbs impossibly elongated, fur sloughing off in patches, eyes swollen to grotesque size. Warp, corruption. The serpent's manifestation had unbound something deep and ruinous. Karok rose. "Move." They pushed deeper. The tunnels ahead were narrower, forcing the Saurus into single-line columns. Runic glyphs flickered on the walls, not skink glyphs, but Skaven markings, scrawls of jagged symbols painted in blood, filth, and warp-green pigment. Some had been clawed over in panic, others were fresh. One drew Karok's eye. It was smeared in red, fresh blood, and shaped like a serpent twist. A skink sapper hissed, "Prophet Zil Tlak, these are his marks." Karok's frill twitched with irritation. "The heretic is dead, maybe," the skink murmured. "But these aren't you." Another skink added, "They say he vanished in the serpent fire, that he descended instead of being consumed." Karok turned away. Rumor was for skinks, not for warriors. Yet he could not help feeling the faintest prickle along his scales. A mark like this, freshly smeared, meant one thing. Someone had come through this tunnel not long ago, someone bleeding, someone surviving the serpent's rampage. Karok let out a slow growl. If he lives, the tunnels will bury him. The first Skaven ambush came suddenly. A section of ceiling cracked open above the column, and a screeching wave of clan rats dropped onto the Saurus line like a rain of claws and fangs. More burst from hidden side tunnels, stabbing wildly with rusted blades. The Saurus wall held, barely. Karok slammed his mace upward, catching a descending rat by the spine and breaking it clean in half. He pivoted, crushing a second rat beneath his heel, while backhanding a third into the wall with bone-splintering force. The Kroxigor roared and swept their clubs in wide arcs, flattening clusters of Skaven with each swing. The tunnels shuddered under the impacts. Skinks fired darts into gaps between the Saurus. Each hit precise neck, eye, throat, dropping rats that attempted to flank. Still, the swarm pressed. Still, they came. Still they clawed and bit and lunged, their desperation sharpened by whatever horrors the serpent had inflicted above. Karok tore through them. His mace rose and fell in rhythm, skull, ribcage, shoulder, spine, until the tunnel floor was slick with black blood. He drove forward, crushing bodies and clearing a path. "Kill," he growled. His cohort answered with silent, ruthless obedience. When the last rat collapsed twitching, Karok raised his fist. "Advance." They passed into the deeper warrens, vast chambers crisscrossed with reinforced pillars and support beams. Warpstone lanterns hung from ropes, casting sickly green light across the underground city, or what remained of it. Whole sections had collapsed, burrow houses crushed under tons of stone. Nesting pits caved in. Skaven corpses lay stacked where dirt had suffocated them mid-scream. Karok took it in. This is the primary hub, murmured a skink sapper. "If we destroy the load-bearing pillars here, the entire burrow will collapse." Karok nodded. "Set charges." Kroxigor moved toward the main pillars, heavy clubs raised. Skinks rushed forward, planting glyph stones along fault lines, chanting activation rites under their breath. They worked quickly. A deep vibration trembled through the ground. The Saurus tensed. From the dark tunnels ahead came a sound like broken metal grinding against bone. Rat ogres, warp-mutated, angrier, desperate. A pack of them emerged, 6 massive silhouettes with glowing eyes and steaming breath. Their flesh bulged in unnatural ways, stitched together with crude metal hooks. Warp pipes protruded from their spines, hissing fumes. The lead ogre roared and charged. The tunnel shook from its weight. Karok met it head-on. He lowered his shoulders, smashed his mace into the beast's knee. The joint snapped with a crunch. The ogre toppled sideways, crashing into a pile of bones. The Kroxigor slammed into the next 2, locking in brutal wrestling matches. One ogre seized a Kroxigor's throat with iron claws. The Kroxigor responded by smashing its skull into the wall until both were bleeding. The Saurus guards attacked in disciplined pairs, one distracting, the other plunging a blade into exposed flesh. The rat ogres flailed wildly, smashing the floor, walls, and unlucky clan rats that got too close. The chamber shook violently. "Charges are ready," a skink squeaked. Karok grabbed a Kroxigor by the shoulder and pointed. "Pound!" The Kroxigor obeyed. He lifted his stone club and brought it down onto the nearest support pillar with a roar. The pillar cracked. Dust rained. The earth trembled. A second Kroxigor struck another pillar. Another crack. Another roar. The rat ogres panicked. They flailed toward the exit tunnels, but the Saurus blocked their path. A Skaven warlock engineer burst from a side passage, crackling stave in hand. "No, no. Stupid lizard things cannot." Karok hurled his mace. The weapon struck the warlock full in the face. Its head imploded. Karok retrieved the mace, turned to his troops, and raised 3 clawed fingers. The signal. A skink slammed the activation rune. Glyphs detonated. A chain of explosions tore through the pillars, blasting stone to dust. The chamber buckled. Roof segments cracked, split apart, and collapsed in roaring cascades. The rat ogres screamed as tons of stone crushed them into pulp. Skaven fled. The Saurus held their ground. The Kroxigor shielded the skinks from falling debris, and Karok stood unmoving as half the Under-Empire hub collapsed beneath Chaqua. When the dust cleared, the tunnel system lay in ruins, burrows flattened, chambers filled, the very pathways of invasion severed. But one thing remained, a smear of blood on the far wall. Skink blood, but arranged intentionally into a pattern. A twisted serpent, coiling, grinning, alive. Karok stared at it, nostrils flaring. "Zeal tlak," he growled. The glyph pulsed faintly in the dark, then went cold. The surviving lizard men gathered around Karok, exhausted but alive. Their bodies bore fresh wounds. Their armor hung in shattered pieces. Their weapons dripped gore. But they had won. They had broken the Skaven's spine beneath the city. Karok raised his mace and pointed toward the exit tunnels leading back to Chaqua. Up, the burrows trembled again. Above, the red serpent still raged, blotting out the sky. Karok tightened his grip. The war was not over, not while a god stalked their dying city. Without waiting for another quake to swallow them, the warriors of Chaqua turned toward the surface, carrying with them the final proof that a heretic still lived. Chapter 15. After the Red Dawn. Dawn returned to Chaqua reluctantly, like a wounded beast dragging itself back into the light. The sky above the jungle was a pale, unhealthy gold, smeared with lingering smoke and drifting ash. Sunlight filtered through torn canopies and shattered terraces, catching on broken stone and pools of dried blood. Where once the serpent city had gleamed with ordered symmetry and ancient purpose, it now stood fractured alive, but irrevocably scarred. The red serpent was gone. No one could say how. Some claimed it had burned itself out, its hunger spent once the last great Skaven concentration had been annihilated. Others whispered that the Slan's distant will had finally pushed it back beyond the veil of reality. A few, mostly red crests, insisted it had simply withdrawn, slithering back into whatever cosmic coil it called home. Whatever the truth, its absence felt heavier than its presence ever had, because Chaqua still lived, and it remembered. The city counted its dead. In the quiet hours after the fighting ended, there were too many for ceremony, too many for proper rites. Entire spawning pools had been corrupted, their waters drained and sealed beneath layers of glyph-warded stone. Within them lay the remains of unborn skinks, and Saurus lives ended before they had even known the sun. Priests daubed those seals with mourning sigils so old their meanings were half lost, prayers muttered through clenched teeth and burning throats. Other pools survived, but barely. Their water was cloudy, tainted by warp residue that resisted cleansing. The hatchings to come would be fewer, weaker, changed. Some of the priest attendants wept openly. Temples stood cracked, their serpent carvings split down the middle. Several ziggurat faces bore the charred outlines of the red serpent's coils, scorched into stone as if the god thing had branded the city in passing. Entire stairways had collapsed, dumping statues and skink defenders alike into rubble-choked pits. The lower terraces were worst. Whole districts had been flattened by Skaven artillery, by falling masonry, by the serpent's indiscriminate fury. The stone there was melted in places, fused into unnatural shapes that no mason dared approach. Croxigor had to clear many of the streets by brute force, hauling away slabs that weighed more than a fully grown Bastiladon. Bodies were everywhere. Skaven corpses lay piled in grotesque mounds, their fur blackened, twisted, or crystallized by warp backlash and divine fire. The stench was overwhelming. Fire had to be brought in waves to burn them away, and even then the smoke clung stubbornly to the air. The lizard men dead were fewer by comparison, but each one cut deeper. Nearly half of Chaqua's skink population was gone. Some slaughtered in the civil strife, some sacrificed in forbidden rites, some crushed beneath falling stone or drowned in poisoned pools, some simply vanished when the red serpent passed over them, erased so completely that not even blood remained. The city's hatcheries would not recover for generations, if ever. The surviving factions gathered in silence on the highest intact terrace 3 days after the siege ended. They stood beneath a sky finally free of smoke, though the air still carried the taste of ash. No banners were flown, no drums sounded. This was not victory. This was survival. Traditionalist priests stood in weathered stone ranks, their crests dulled, their robes torn and stained. Among them stood Saurus captains and Croxigor wardens, impassive but vigilant. Opposite them gathered the remnants of the cult of Sotek. The red crests were far fewer than before. Many had died in the fighting, others in the failed rituals, still others simply disappeared. Those who remained wore no blood paint now. Their amulets had been removed or dulled with ash. Their eyes, once fever-bright, now flickered with something more complicated: fear, guilt, unfinished faith. Between the two groups stood Tlacora. He looked older than he had ever seen before. His scales were chipped, his frill permanently scarred by psychic backlash and falling debris. He leaned more heavily on his staff now, and his eyes, once sharp with certainty, held exhaustion edged with sorrow. He spoke without raising his voice. "Chaqua stands," he said, "but it stands wounded, broken in places that cannot easily be restored." No one argued. "The slan does not wake again," Tlacora continued. "His command has been given, his strength expended. We cannot look to him for guidance in the days ahead." At that, a ripple of unease passed through the crowd. "We must guide ourselves." Traditionalists stiffened. Cultists watched carefully. "Let this be recorded," Tlacora said, staff striking the stone once, sharply. "The cult of Sotek is no longer outlawed. The Old One's doctrine has proven incomplete in the face of catastrophe." "Yola." Murmurs rippled, some shocked, some vindicated, some furious. "But neither shall the cult rule," he added immediately, silencing them. "Never again. No mass rites, no blood ceremonies, no forced devotion." His gaze hardened. "And any who attempt to summon what was unleashed here will be cast out or slain." Eyes turned toward the red crests. Their spokesman, a scarred skink whose crest had been half burned away, bowed stiffly. "We accept," he said hoarsely. "Sotek remains, but his hunger must be honored with restraint." Tlacora studied him for a long moment. "So be it," he said. "Coexistence, then. Not harmony, not forgiveness. Survival." The word echoed through the terrace like a verdict. Survival. Later that cycle, as the sun dipped low and turned the cracked stone golden red, Karok stood beside Tlacora at the edge of the central plaza. What had once been the beating heart of Chaqua was now a wound. The great ritual pit lay shattered, its edges fused and cracked. The stone bowl was gone entirely, either vaporized or torn free and dragged into whatever void the red serpent had come from. The plaza tiles were scorched into spirals and arcs where divine coils had swept across them. Here and there, scorched outlines remained. Skinks, Soras, even Skaven, frozen into stone by impossible heat, twisted in their final moments. "This is where it rose," Karok rumbled. His voice was roughened by smoke and old blood. His armor had been cleaned, but no amount of scrubbing could remove all the scars of the fight beneath the city. "Yes," Tlacora replied quietly. "And where it fed." They stood in silence for a time, watching skinks carefully scrape away corrupted stone and haul debris from the plaza's edges. Croxigor labored nearby, lifting slabs that took 10 skinks to budge otherwise. Karok's tail twitched. "The tunnels are sealed," he said. "The primary under-Empire hub collapsed completely. Survivors fled deeper, too deep to pursue without risking collapse across the whole region." Tlacora nodded. "The Skaven will return. They always do." Another silence. Karok finally spoke again. "Zil Tlak," the name hung in the air like a curse. "We found no body," Karok continued. "Only blood and runes, fresh ones, deeper than any Skaven mark." Tlacora closed his eyes briefly. "I know. You believe he lives?" "I believe," Tlacora said slowly, "that faith as twisted as his is hard to extinguish completely." Karok grunted. "If he returns, I will not hesitate," Tlacora said firmly. "Not again." Karok studied the ruined plaza. "The serpent, yes. It was not Sotek as he is meant to be," Karok said. "Not a question, a conclusion." "No," Tlacora agreed. "It was what happens when belief outpaces wisdom, when hunger answers prayer, instead of purpose. The Saurus captain flexed his claws. It killed Skaven. Yes, and our own. Yes. Karuk let out a low, rumbling breath. Then it is no ally. No, Chaqua said. It is a warning. They turned together, looking out across Chaqua. The city breathed again, but shallowly. Repair gangs worked day and night. Glyph words were reforged, imperfectly. New patrols walked routes that had not existed before. Skinks and red crests passed one another with wary silence, no longer reaching for blades, but not lowering their guard either. Above it all, the Slan's pyramid loomed quiet and sealed, its star globes dim. Knowledge had failed, faith had failed, and yet something endured. Karok straightened. Chaqua stands because it adapts, he said, because it bleeds and does not die. Chaqua nodded. Let us hope adaptation does not one day become corruption. Deep beneath the city, far below collapsed vaults and sealed tunnels, a passage still breathed. It was narrow, barely stable, its walls slick with old blood and warp residue. The stone here bore unfamiliar marks, serpent curves, etched not by Skaven claw, but by careful, deliberate hands. In the darkness, something moved. A faint hiss echoed down the tunnel, soft and patient. Red light flickered briefly, then vanished. And somewhere far below Chaqua, in the forgotten arteries of the world, Sotek's blessing coiled, waiting for the next moment of weakness. The red dawn had passed, but its shadow had not.